My name is Peter Ström. I'm a graphic designer and part of half of Konst Teknik, art and technology or art and technique. And
my name is Mattias Jakobsson. We're based in Stockholm.
Well, we actually met online as teenagers. We're born, both of us, in the late 1970s, and we were kind of the first generation of internet kids in the mid-90s. And as Sweden is not the biggest country, there were not maybe that many typeface interested 15-year-olds around. So Mattias and I, we discovered each other through a mutual interest in the typeface Barmino in the mid-90s. And that's how we got to know each other.
Yeah, we worked on Peter ran a web page that had sort of like a messaging board, and we did some work on that together then. But everything, I mean, that was like in that period when you could start working when you were 15. There were so many things to be done like online. So when we both like were finished with high school, we started to work directly, and then we both worked at 2 different companies, and after like a year and a half for me, I set up the same company as Peter was working for. I was living in Gothenburg at that time, and I started that company in like the Gothenburg office of the same company. And Peter moved there, so we worked together for a while.
We worked with these kind of commercial, it was more like web agency kind of web agency, and then we hadn't studied, neither of us, and after that we decided, this was kind of when the .com era, when the bubble burst in the early 2000s, we decided that it was time for first a break and later studies. So we studied after having worked with like, let's say like web design for a bunch of years. Mm.
I think coming from like, I mean, we started being interested in design through writing code. It was so it came at the same time, so I think for us it's always been kind of natural to do both. Even when we studied, I guess we maybe learned a little bit more about print and like that, the other part, but since then we always did both. And I think the clients we have quite often ask for both. Now the last couple of years maybe we've done a little bit more of the digital projects, but for quite a few of the clients we have, we do like most parts of both.
And I think for us, like a blank HTML file, it's more of like, that's the starting point rather than a blank paper in that sense. Like that comes more natural for us to start completely digital, regardless of kind of where we're going with it. But none of us we don't really know how to draw or come from that background at all. We come from we're computer guys to begin with. And I think that kind of has always shaped what we're doing. And we've always been like within, the kind of Stockholm, Swedish kind of design landscape, we were always kind of like the computer guys rather than the graphic design guys to begin with or something like that. So it was always like that's kind of our niche from very early on, and that's always something we're still fascinated by and stick with quite a lot.
Yeah, and we've also all kind of even more and more, I would say, drifted towards doing like really most of the programming on our own. So I think in that sense it's also sort of we look upon programming as a sort of a creative tool in that sense, and it makes it, I think for us we mostly work with like a lot of cultural organizations, and when you have limited budgets, it's quite good to be able to sort of do both, so we can choose where we want to like put our focus and I mean, we collaborate with programmers in some projects, but quite a lot of projects we manage everything on our own.
I wouldn't say that it's been more difficult to argue for let's say handmade websites than it was 10 years ago. I think the argument is very closely related to how to kind of, I mean, why you make like an artist book or a book for an artist, why you put all that effort into materiality and like all these things with a printed matter. We argue kind of, you know, the same way about a website when it's about being custom made and all these things that we can, from like a visual perspective, from an experience, from everything, can kind of make into something unique. And so yes, people are maybe more trained or more skilled even on the commissioner side, but that I think that's all more actually opened up, that they want to do something kind of more interesting or more special rather than just have a website. It's more like, if we're actually making a website, let's make it something that is not a template, that is not just posted on Instagram or whatever. It's actually its own kind of thing.
I think we've been fortunate to work with people who haven't really asked for that or maybe, I mean, I can definitely see that discussion coming, and from sort of like an economical perspective, that it's way more, you get so much more from using sort of like a template, but we haven't really been asked that, and it seems like I think also because a lot of projects we do are either like identity projects where someone also need a website, or maybe like a redesign where someone also need a website. And because we always do both, then it's kind of natural for us to sort of start from scratch, because we do the identity, and from the identity so the websites develops.
It's a good question. I mean, me personally, I didn't study in Sweden, so I don't have that experience from being a student here, whereas Mattias, you did. So I think our teaching or our experience with being students are a little bit different to begin with. And also we studied we finished school 15 years ago, so it's also been like, of course, a while. It's kind of, the memory fades a little bit, but I think one thing we've been talking about over the last, I guess, maybe 10 years, but especially the last maybe 5 years, is that the idea of graphic design and maybe graphic design studio is less around than it was when we started 15 years ago. I don't think the students identify with as being graphic designers in the same way maybe than they did a while ago, and people maybe work more like loose with other kind of collaborations where they see themselves more of some kind of a creative rather than especially a graphic designer. So in that sense, I think it seems to have changed a little bit. Or what do you say? Do you agree?
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, I also think like it feels like people know, students are really, they know like the sort of like the software, the technical parts of everything, they already know that when they start school. Most of them, or a lot of them at least. It feels like, compared to when I studied, I think that you had to sort of like that. I mean, some people knew a lot, but you had to sort of like come up to some kind of basic, average knowledge first before you can sort of go into next level. But it feels like that part is sort of already finished when they've already done that when they apply for the schools.
But I think it's still interesting how many students are very interested in making printed work and books and magazines, but it feels like it comes from a completely different angle. I mean, as I said earlier, we were maybe the first internet generations. Of course, we are already like native digital in that sense, but we also grew up in we're maybe early, and we grew up in an era of still the printed matter and the physical record and all these things. Whereas, of course, the students now, for them, books and magazines and record covers and all these things, they mean something different. But they might want to make a book still, but it comes from, it means something different, I would say, than maybe it did for us.
That's a big difference in terms of like sharing inspiration. I think just because of social media and all that, I would say it's a big difference from when I studied, when it comes to sort of like visual expression or visual references. It was way more different, I would say. I think diverse. Yeah. I would say now it feels like everyone, maybe not but they at least know of sort of the same things and have seen sort of the same references and influences. I have a feeling that it's more sort of like a bit more narrow in that sense, maybe, but maybe at one sense also they know more, like they've done more visual research, or they're more aware of what's happening. At least, I mean, that might also be a little bit different between schools and classes, but when I studied, it was quite a lot of people who maybe didn't have so much prior experience or knew so much of graphic design. But I think now when you start to study it, you already kind of like know where to look at yeah. I mean, there used to be posters, but it has always been, compared to other places, it's always been really poor, I would say. And I wouldn't really say that we have. I mean, it's also interesting to see at like graphic designers that like exclusively work with posters, or like really good poster designers. There are none in Sweden who are really good poster designers, I would say. I mean, there are a few who know how to do posters, but I mean, there's no one who can live off doing only that. Like, I remember Daniel from MetaHaven was like, we only know how to do posters. Like, they would never survive in Sweden. They wouldn't. I mean, there's this like, we have something called kulturtavlor, which is like this billboards, posters for cultural organizations, and those, they are like allowed to exist, and I mean, you're allowed to put them up on these places, and I mean that you can produce posters for them but that's kind of it.
Yeah, and I think it's been like this for such a long time. I mean, we are not even part of a generation that have seen kind of a change. It's always been like that. So maybe that was different, prior to the internet. I think it's because the cities, and especially Stockholm, where we are, the public space have been it's so privatized. It's become this, it's not seen as something for the masses to kind of get introduced to what is going on, and I think partly because, I mean, a huge kind of change in kind of political how things have been done there the last 20 years have happened, but it's also this kind of the idea of the digitization of everything, Swedes have been very proud of being very early with everything that has to do with screens, and therefore I think from a kind of governmental perspective, that's where you're supposed to kind of find information about cultural events. It's not in the streets, because that could be considered, littering.
Yeah, and it should be clean and look new and fresh.
Yeah, so that prices can go up on apartments and things like that. So in that sense, it is quite dull. There's not so much. Basically, there's not so much nice information being shown, and there's no cultural posters, unfortunately.
We also wonder. It was when we started the studio, it was really like one of our goals was to sort of. We almost never presented ourselves as art directors. We always said we were graphic designers, and we wanted to sort of reclaim the role make the graphic designer be sort of like a valid profession that wasn't considered to be someone who is just like a slave under some fancy director role. And also there are not so many small studios in general. There's like the advertising agency is real, like culture is super strong, and for some reason even like the bigger cultural institutions, they kind of not really dare to go to small studios. Sometimes they do, but like compared to other countries and cities, I would say it's more like often that you go to like a bigger agency to do that kind of stuff. And I mean, we always really wanted to do something against that, and we know, I mean, a few of the people you're going to meet now who are also like having a smaller studios who all kind of try to react to that, but it's a sort of it's a strong culture here, and there's been a few of the studios similar to ours, but it's really rare that someone managed to do it for more than 7 years, or like, I mean, like there were a few when we started, but hardly any of them are still around.
I mean, maybe it's also in terms of schools, there's quite a lot of commercial branding related schools here, and of course there's, when there's industry, like commercial industries kind of making these schools happen one way or the other. Of course, way more people are going to graduate from there and then therefore start up a branding studio, not a small graphic design studio. We have been in this situation over the years at several occasions where we've been asked to maybe not pitch, but to give a kind of a presentation of ourselves together with other smaller studios, and then we heard that we lost the project because a bigger studio were also invited, and they said that this budget is so low that we do it for free anyway.
But they will figure out a way to get like a profit from maybe selling ads to some kind of publication, and then they take the profit from that.
Or they just decide that they work with H&M or Volvo or whatever, so they doesn't matter these small budgets for the cultural projects. It's just like coffee money for them anyway. Do you want to give it a try?
I need to think about it a little bit, but I mean, purely aesthetical, I think, or like, and we've always been really interested in typography. I mean, that's how we met. We met through a typeface, and I think like you can't deny that like most of our projects are. We really, it often starts in typography in some way. Maybe a little bit more in the beginning, or in the early years, we had more of like an interest in like conceptually stronger ideas, and but I would say maybe that has changed a little bit. I mean, we spent a lot of time in the first 10 years working on every single detail and like putting a lot of pride in our work. And I mean,
arguing about small things that no one would ever know or care about.
Yeah. Now we have kids and we have to be a little bit more efficient.
The idea of internet for us, of the internet, what that made possible is kind of meeting people. And first, I mean, we met through the internet when we were young, but that's always been our tool to kind of reach out and, you know, find new people, new places, etc. in the world. And I think we've done quite a lot of projects over the years where that has been almost like a way to work, like to kind of, you know, maybe we invite this person that we don't know, but this is a good reason, and let's see what happens, kind of. And we've done quite a lot of these projects. I think that has been also like DNA in the sense that we want to reach out, and we're like, as much as we love spending time with each other in this basement with our computers, we also, I think, are quite frustrated with it and want to kind of reach out into the world. And I think that has always been quite a big part of how we work, that we don't need to, we can involve other people, and we can find, you know, maybe collaboration is a nice, better word or something, even though it's a little bit of a cliche, but yeah, we've always tried to kind of collaborate with the world.
Also in the first maybe 10 years we always, maybe 1/3 of our time we tried to work on like our own projects. Yeah. We don't do that as much now. Now it's more teaching that takes that sort of part of our time. But for a really long time, we spent quite a lot of time on building platforms for collaboration, or like doing things that we sort of thought that. I mean, we also come from this like do-it-yourself culture. Like, I mean, we started doing these websites when we were 16. I had sort of like a punk fanzine when I was 15, and that's how I learned like Corel Draw or whatever. I mean, like when we see something that we need, we do it on our own. And I think that like for a long time that was also really an important part of what we were doing. That has changed a little bit, mostly due to lack of time, but I think it's still sort of like it's in our minds, and it's like sort of the way we. I mean, we've kind of also, because we have small budgets. Like we've never had like a really good budget where we can do whatever we felt like. We always have to sort of like do some magic with, and I think that's also kind of fun because you have limitations and you need to sort of like find ways to use those in a good way.
Okay.